You're on the board of iconic companies like Calm, Rothy's, Lady Gaga's House Labs, Lightyear, and Beehive. What's it like being a board member?
In terms of how much work it is, I'm sure there are definitely some folks who maybe just call into a board meeting and, maybe they do their 2-3 hours a quarter. That is not Lightspeed. At Lightspeed, we very much believe in being truly active. When I was about 21 and working on the trading floor at Morgan Stanley, my then boss left to go to Goldman Sachs. And I remember going to the bathroom and crying. Came straight back out. The guy who headed up the whole floor called me over and he said, "I can tell you've been crying. Never, ever let that happen again." Sometimes you have to follow your body, And so if you're naturally a night owl, you get more energy at night, you do better work at night. Well, don't fight against that. I think embrace it and, do your creative work at night.
Justice for night owls with all this push to be morning people.
Exactly. I really believe in thinking 2 or 3 career steps ahead. What are the tools that I need to put in my toolbox now to mean that I am going to be really well equipped to go after that career path? My advice to anybody is, if you want to be doing something, start doing it today. So start acting like you're a VC today if you want to be a VC. If you're a woman and you want to take risk and start a great startup, then, do it. Take that plunge. Because there's definitely a lot of VCs out there who see the greatness in what you're doing.
Welcome to Cherie's Corner, a podcast where we dive into the topic of careers and hear from my friends and guests who are killing it in the business world so we can learn from their lessons, their wisdoms, and their mistakes. I'm your host, Cherie, and currently I'm a business school student at Stanford University. Previously, I had experience working in tech and venture capital. In this episode, I speak with Nicole Quinn. Nicole is a general partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners. While at Lightspeed, Nicole has invested in iconic consumer companies like Rothy's, Goop, Cameo, and Calm. Nicole started her career on the equity sales and research side of Morgan Stanley, where she worked on the IPO of companies like Facebook, Groupon, and Pandora. Nicole's a Stanford Graduate School of Business alum, and we talk about all things entrepreneurship and career advice. I am so excited for you guys to join in on our discussion. Let's dive in. Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining Cherie's Corner podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Hey, Cherie. It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
And so before we get started, I give the opportunity for my guests to ask me any questions that they'd like. Hardball, softball, ask away.
Okay. I first of all said that this was a very unique idea that Cherie does. I've been on, I feel like, a few podcasts and no one's ever asked me this. So I love the fact that I get to ask you questions. So firstly, what was your favorite childhood book and why?
So my favorite series growing up was called the Magic Treehouse series. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
Okay. I think I started in around 3rd grade. It was my first chapter book that I had gotten into. And looking back on it now, I was just it helped me learn about different parts of history through the lens of adventures that Jack and Annie, the 2 main characters, their siblings that they go on. And it was part fantasy, part realistic historic fiction. And so it felt like I was going on these fantastical adventures with these 2 characters. And I didn't realize how much I was learning about Mount Vesuvius, the volcanic eruption, a long time ago, or about the Knights of the Round Table and King Arthur, those myths and stuff. So I thought it was really interesting that I can learn about history through this fun way of going on adventures.
That is so cool because my favorite book was also about an adventure. So I love the fact that was yours. That's really cool.
What was yours?
Mine was Eden Blight and the Folks of the Faraway Tree. And every single day there's a different adventure at the top of the tree. So you should read that one next. I'm going to read yours. Okay, so I adore reading autobiographies. And I'm curious, what's your favorite autobiography and one key lesson that you took away from it?
I read this one recently. I think it was in 2018. It's Educated by, I think, Tara Westover.
Haven't read it. Tell us about it.
It's one of my favorites. It's about this woman, and you follow her through her childhood. And she grew up in a family where they didn't allow her to go to school. And so, like, the first school that she went to was college, but it was, like, following her throughout her life, family dynamics that she went through. That it's situated in Idaho in the U.S. And, I mean, the lesson, the takeaway for me is a story about, like, grit and with, like, enough persistence of, like, wanting to do something. Like, she wanted to go to school, but her parents didn't allow her to. You know, like, family dynamic, and I think there's also mental health issues with her parents there. And so she was, like, fighting so hard to be integrated in, like, more like normal society and also get an education. It's like a really powerful, powerful journey.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah. And also the power of education and the role it plays in our lives.
I definitely agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
My gosh, okay, we're all going to go out and get that book now. What is your favorite podcast other than your own, and why?
I've been really into the health and wellness space.
Mm-hmm.
So Andrew Huberman's podcast is up there for me. And then also Peter Attia, his podcast, The Drive. Sometimes it's like a little bit more academic, where he talks about like ways to increase longevity. Andrew Huberman, it's like a lot about like biohacking and sleep and diet, things you can do to increase performance. And I think that's really fun, trying to incorporate those in into my life. One thing, one gripe though, is that I think with these health and wellness podcasts, and like I'd love to hear your take on this too. Like I don't think that there's like, I've yet to find a woman equivalent who's like at that caliber talking about, you know, the things that women have to talk about for health and ways that we can increase performance, but it's different from a man's physiology.
Gosh, that's so true. I've been asking so many people this recently, and a lot of them say Huberman and
Really?
Attia. And so those two have really pulled ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. We need to have really strong women. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of my favorites is the All In podcast.
Yeah.
And we keep saying we need to do a female equivalent of it. So
I would love to hear
agree.
that. If you started that, I would dial in every single time.
It would be fun.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Thank you for this set of questions. That was kind of like our little warm-up.
Thank you.
Just to jump into the icebreakers,
Okay,
I'd
cool.
love to know, this is one of my favorite questions to ask folks. What is your morning wake-up routine, and what is your evening wind-down routine?
Yes, so I wish I was a morning person. My husband and I went away for New Year's this year to Bali just for a few days, and it really gave us a sense of perspective to like step back and say, what do we want for this coming year? How are we going to change things? And of course we said, we're going to wake up at 5 a.m. We're going to start the day with meditation, with working out, with going through all the news from the day. They do a little bit of work before the kids wake up. But of course, that has not happened. I think we did it for about 2 weeks. And then I realized I am most effective at nighttime. And so as a night owl, I get all my work done late at night. And I wake up at 7 o'clock when the kids make some noise. So that is my morning routine, waking up with the kids and then having breakfast with them. But you know, that's probably the best way to start the day because I'm spending it with the people I most love in this world.
Oh, I love that. And also figuring out what is a routine that works for you. Like not pushing yourself to be like, I need to be this type of person if that's not what drives you.
Sometimes you have to follow your body, you know? And so if you're naturally a night owl, you get more energy at night, you do better work at night. Well, you know, don't fight against that. I think embrace it and, you know, do your creative work at night.
Justice for night owls with all this like push to be morning people.
Exactly.
The next question is, what are you listening to now? And it can be podcast, music, audiobook.
I love Audible. And so I download 2, 3, 4 books each month. And there's definitely some trends that emerge amongst them. One is around children. And so I just read Esther Wozniak's book because one of her daughters, Susan, went to be CEO of YouTube. One of her daughters, Anne, became CEO and founder of 23andMe. The other one, Janet, was an incredible doctor And so it's like, wow, those are your 3 children. What did you do so right as a parent to have those 3 children? So that was a fascinating book. Highly recommend that to everybody. And then I definitely listened to, rather, a lot of autobiographies.
Yeah.
Hence my question to you. And then I do love a good podcast. So yes, Peter Attia, Huberman, and the All In podcast for some fun.
I didn't realize the Wozniak matriarch had written a book about her daughters and I guess how she raised them.
Yes.
That's amazing. That's going to be top of my reading list.
Yes.
The inside look.
I highly recommend it. It is such a good book. I literally just listened to it pretty much all in one go when I was coming back from a flight to London last week. It's called How to Raise Successful People by Esther Wozniak.
I love that. And I love that it's the mother of 3 powerful women and 3 daughters. Like, that's...
Well said.
Yeah.
So true.
Incredible lens. The last question was about the best trip you've been on. Was it Bali or is it something else that comes to mind?
You know, I think it was Bali because I've never been before. I've always wanted to go. But even though I've booked it many times in the past, always the trip hasn't happened because of work or COVID. And so I was really looking forward to it. We went to go and see several different spiritual healers, sitting down with one, especially, Made Lunas. He was just profound for an hour, just telling me everything about who I am, what my life's been like, which was spot on, by the way, and then what my life will be like. It was fascinating, and he really tries to focus on the good and the positive and how you can help other people and make a difference in this world. So it was really special, and then it was like a second honeymoon with my husband.
Oh, that's so lovely.
That was nice.
Did you go to Bali with the intent of visiting a spiritual healer, or did you get there and be like, oh, this is just a cool activity, something we can like tack on to our trip?
Good question. It was a mix of both. I definitely booked it in advance. They generally book up a month or 2 in advance, the good ones. And so I thought, let's go there for some relaxation, for some sort of vision setting for the year. And then while we're there, also see a spiritual healer.
That's so fascinating. I would love to do one of, there's this conversation now with my friends at business school. It's not just about like the career intensity, the career focus, but like what is the emotion behind it? What is the spirituality behind it? And some of the stuff that you can't really grasp. So it's really cool to hear that you did that.
Nice. Yes, very cool. I like the way you described that.
Awesome. The first question is, can you please introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit more about how you grew up and where you grew up?
Of course. I grew up in England, as you can tell by the accent, although I do feel like I have a bit of a mixed accent now because I lived in London, but my father's Australian, mother's English. And then I lived in New York and California, so I have a really mixed accent now. And I had a very entrepreneurial father. He just passed away a few weeks ago, actually. That was why I was back in England last week. But we did it as a celebration of his life rather than a funeral because he was an entrepreneur, a very risk-loving entrepreneur. And I would say I got the bug of entrepreneurship from him at a very young age. He made me love it. I was helping him build online pharmacy marketplaces across Europe. We had like 7 different marketplaces in different European countries in the 1990s. Great time to be doing it, but then of course most of it fell apart in the year 2000. So that was fun to be doing at a young age. Then I studied math, and so it was pre-financial crash, and so finance was like the hot thing to do, and so I went into finance and spent nearly a decade at Morgan Stanley. But I enjoyed it because I was in London, then I was in New York, got to cover some of the great internet companies, did the Facebook Pandora group on IPOs. But I've been doing angel investing on the side, and I realized I was much more passionate about that. So I left to carry on doing the angel investing, and I went to a fintech startup, worked there for a year, and it was Nutmeg, which is as a UK fintech company, and then came out here for business school. And I was at Stanford, and I had a startup which I worked on for a couple of years. I pitched it to Lightspeed. So I actually went to most of the VCs up and down Sandhill Road, and I really loved Lightspeed. And so I stayed in touch with them, and joined them, which was, 8 years ago now.
What a wonderful and rich career. I'm really excited some of the points that you brought up. Angel investing we'll dive into, and many more questions about your career. And I'm really sorry to hear about the loss of your father. It sounds like his life was really celebrated and really spectacular.
Thank you.
And he's left a huge mark on you and your family in this world too, with his entrepreneurial spirit.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Yeah. And thinking about your career, when you started at Morgan Stanley and worked at startups and then venture firms and having your own startup before coming to Lightspeed, what were some of the frameworks that you used to guide your decision at each step?
So I really believe in thinking 2 or 3 career steps ahead. And with that framework, I then think you need to think, what are the tools that I need to put in my toolbox now to mean that I am going to be really well equipped to go after that career path? And so if you've decided you want to be an engineer, or if you've decided you want to be a VC or a startup founder, or whatever it may be, a plumber, you've got to really think about what are those tools I need to have in my toolbox? How do I get great experience in that? And so if you want to start a company in the travel space, well, hey, if you've spent time at Airbnb, and then maybe an earlier stage startup, and then, maybe even like a much larger travel company, you're going to have such interesting tools in your toolbox to really go after and run at that opportunity to start a travel startup. And so that was the framework that I did and have always used. Fortunately now I feel like this is I feel like VC is like an end of your career. So I feel like a lot of people stay in VC for many, many years. One of my old partners, Jeremy Lowe, he still does lots with Lightspeed, but he's also now doing lots in San Francisco politics. So I also think that's something that might be interesting at one stage, but maybe 3 careers ahead.
Yeah, I like that idea of thinking, what is the end in mind, and how do I work backwards from there?
Yeah.
And that was going to be my question for you. Was VC for you when you were at Morgan Stanley and doing some reflection? Was VC where you wanted to end up?
Well, in the sort of early 2000s in England, venture capital wasn't thought of in the same way that it's now thought of globally, or it was thought of back then in Silicon Valley. In England, it was very much, if you're going to start your startup, you have to use your own money. And so my father, every single startup that he did, he took 100% of the money that he had before from selling a last company and put it into the next one. There was never any, okay, I'll save a little bit for a rainy day. I was like, put all of it into the next one. It just wasn't a concept over there. But increasingly so, there was the concept of angel investing. And so I did that. I knew there was going to be something more than just equity research. I knew I was going to go on to something else. And then it was probably moving to New York where I realized, yes, VC is what I want to do. And that is why I went to do an MBA, to try and pivot into that career.
When you had started your startup at the GSB, what were some of the ideas within yourself or within the market, that you were trying to test? And were you able to get a glimpse into VC at that stage?
Yes, definitely. So I would say for the first year or so, I didn't even think about VC. It was very much like heads down building the business. It was in the wearable space because it was pre-Apple Watch. And so at that time, we knew wearables are going to be really big. And Fitbit was out, but very few of the others were. Fitbit was very much for fitness enthusiasts, and we wanted to have something that you could be worn as like a bracelet or a ring or a necklace. And it was a fun idea and it was great to test it, but then Apple Watch came up with a beautiful product and far cheaper than we'd be able to do it for. But it was interesting thinking about hardware, and also now with the rise of AI hardware, it's interesting to kind of bring myself back to those times again and think about what it will really take to win for AI hardware. So yes, that's how I was kind of thinking about startups back then. And then after about a year or so, I was like, okay, it's time to pitch the VCs. And that's when I got to know folks.
Nice. Looking back on your career, are there times that you can point to where they have been big pivotal moments? How did you feel, and how did you think about that moment specifically?
So when you ask this question, what comes up for me is people rather than moments. And I suppose it is meeting these people, or those people saying the profound statements that they say to you, or the questions they ask you, that become those pivotal moments. And so I always thought, okay, well, after business school, I'll go and do a startup or two, for the next 10, 20 years, and then I'll go into VC. Because I had the belief that you had to do your own startup really to be good at VC. And then I met Jeremy Liu, and meeting Jeremy was a pivotal moment for me, because we had many meetings before I joined Lightspeed, and in all of those different meetings and lunches, really getting to know him, he said to me, if you want to do something, the best thing to do is to get experience doing that thing. You can still think 3 career steps ahead, but you don't necessarily need to do a startup for the next 10, 20 years. You can actually join a VC and get on-the-job experience, and then you can rise up through a VC. You don't need to just join a VC as a partner. So many partners back in the day were very anti-partner track. It was always, we hire partners, and if we bring in associates, it's like a 2-year and out program. And I think now everybody has now changed their views on this. And so, bar maybe 1 or 2. And I think that's great for young folks, because it's like, hey, if you really prove yourself in VC, then you can stay there for, the next 20 years and really be, one of the general partners running the place. And that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. I love the focus of the story is on a person who caused a moment. Yeah. I love that. And so my last question on this career section is about emotions at work. So in one of my previous episodes with Roloff, we talked about crying at work, and Roloff told this story about feeling super invested, so much so that he would get emotional and cry and, figure out ways to recover from that. And so I want to ask you, how do you work through emotions at work?
So when I was about 21 and working on the trading floor at Morgan Stanley, my then boss left to go to Goldman Sachs. And I was like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? A, I'm going to miss him. B, does this mean I no longer have a position? And I remember going to the bathroom and crying, maybe for 5 minutes. I came straight back out. And the guy who headed up the whole floor called me over and he said, I can tell you've been crying. Never, ever let that happen again. I was like, wow. That to me was this really hard moment, and made me realize I am not staying in investment banking forever. They definitely have different values to me. I think it is so important to be yourself. But from that moment, I did not let any tears or emotion show while working at the bank. But then when I joined VC, I was like, wow, I can get my soul back. I kid, but, it's true. I do feel like in VC, it's all about being your true, authentic self. Because if you're going to be on the board of a company, you're really going to be on that journey with a founder for the next decade. You're going to go through a lot together. No company ever goes straight up and to the right. There's always so many zigs and zags along the way. And there's going to be times where that founder will call you in tears. And maybe you're going to as well. There's a company that I'm on the board of, and gosh, everything went straight up and to the right for such a long period. And then, gosh, there was a lot of downs. And the founder would call me in tears. And, personal things as well as professional things. And you are invested. And you care, right? You want a board member who really cares. You want a board member who believes in you, who deeply cares, will be your biggest supporter. And it's okay to cry.
That's really powerful to hear you say. I think it's extremely difficult to compartmentalize, and we can do our best work when we're bringing all parts of ourselves into the workplace and what we're throwing ourselves into.
Well said. I like that.
And so you mentioned boards, and this is a great segue into our next section. You're on the board of iconic companies like Calm, Rothy's, Lady Gaga's House Labs, Lightyear, and Beehive. What's it like being a board member? How much work is it? And can you give an example of a difficult conversation or situation that you were in?
In terms of how much work it is, I'm sure there are definitely some folks who maybe just call into a board meeting and, maybe they do their 2-3 hours a quarter. That is not Lightspeed. At Lightspeed, we very much believe in being truly active and helpful investors. And so, the board meeting itself may be 3 hours every quarter, but we try to go there in person. When we do the work for a couple of days before the board meeting, it is, putting on questions into the board deck and making sure if there's anything that we're unsure of or we feel like would be helpful for the founder to know, jumping on the phone with the founder beforehand, doing, a sort of call with them before, maybe debriefing afterwards, and then speaking to the other board members. Maybe there's something that's really important that all the board members have to make sure we're really aligned. Mm-hmm. Because I think it is not fair for a founder if all your board members have different perspectives. That's okay for a short period of time, but it is not going to be clear or helpful to you if everybody's telling you to row in a different direction. So get your board members to be aligned. Get them to do the work ahead of the board meeting to make sure to speak to one another and get aligned. And that's much more helpful to a CEO. We really believe in, doing the work and then doing a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever makes sense for the founder, call with them to always be, helping along the way. And then a difficult conversation that we've had on a board. Gosh.
It could be with the founder or with another board member.
What would you prefer?
I'm curious about the relationship between board members, especially if they're from different companies, because I'm in a class at the GSB called, I'm in MGE, Managing Growing Enterprises, and quite often we talk about the founder-board relationship, which I've heard a couple of times now, but what happens when you're with another peer, another board member, and there's a discussion or a disagreement there?
Yes, so I would say that definitely often happens. Yeah. There's been companies where other board members have called me and said, hey, we want to replace the CEO. And for me, pretty 99% of the time, one of the main reasons I'm investing in a company is because of that CEO. And, that's a real belief of Lightspeed. We're always saying, what is the initial team like? Who is the founder? We say we invest in the very best entrepreneurs, not just companies. Mm-hmm. And so it is so much about the people. You can have real disagreements with folks about this because it is so fundamental. There's so few examples of where a board has thrown out a CEO against the CEO's wishes that's been successful. Mm. There's plenty where the founder has said, hey, I would like to bring in a new CEO. Okay, fine. But very, very few where it's against their wishes. And so that to me is an area where you definitely should have a disagreement with the board on. And, we've had those discussions, and then it's about gently getting folks to, come around to your way of thinking. Mm-hmm. In that example, it definitely was the best idea to, keep that CEO. So, that's what happens.
Going back to the GSB, you graduated the GSB in 2016. My question here is, what are the reunions like? And the question behind the question is, I'm curious about what matters to people after they've graduated the GSB, they've had some perspective and time out and developed themselves in their career. What are the conversations like?
So I was meant to have my 5-year reunion, but then COVID hit. So we did not get to do a big reunion that year. So I'm very excited for my 10-year. But I have to say, every time someone from the GSB gets married, it's like a reunion. And so we get to have, 1 or 2 reunions a year, which is so special. And you're absolutely right that what people care about has shifted. And so there's definitely some questions that are asked about work, but it is not given the same level of importance as it was 1, 2, 3 years out of business school. At that point, everybody's asking everybody else, how work is going. And now it's very much around marriage, children, where you're living, if you're still working. There's definitely some folks who have given it up, and that's their decision. How your parents are doing, what country you decided to settle in. And so those are really interesting conversations to have, because then you can dive into detail with people on like their values beneath the surface of that decision to maybe have children or not have children, and other areas. And so that's what we discuss at the reunions now over a few drinks.
Yeah. What was the change after 2 to 3 years? Was it the time? Was it the perspective? What do you think happened that now the conversations have shifted?
And people started having families. That was definitely when things shifted. And then maybe some people started having health issues. Some people started getting divorced. That was when those were the catalysts.
So maybe a shifting in priorities.
Yeah, exactly.
In life. What were some pivotal classes or experiences that you had at Stanford?
So many great classes. I love everything that Andy Ratcliffe teaches. We had a great VC class with Peter Wendell and Eric Schmidt. And I used to love it because Eric Schmidt would come in on a Monday and say, how was everybody's weekend? Yes, I just did a quick trip for the weekend to the Vatican to have a conversation with the Pope about how we can bring Christianity to, a few billion more people. And so it was just, exactly. And so I loved just the incredible people, truly exceptional people that would come into every single class. But I have to say the most pivotal class for me was definitely interpersonal dynamics, which they call touchy-feely. I always say it is the reason I'm married today. It is the reason that I've been at Lightspeed nearly a decade. And, it's because it really does teach you just maybe the right way to have conversations, i.e. staying on your side of the net. So I'm very grateful for that class.
I'm in that class right now. We have our retreat this weekend, so...
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You are in for a lot of great emotions.
Okay. I'm excited, but also incredibly nervous. And yeah, standing on my side of the net, the ladder of inference, there's just so many good takeaways from that class so far, and I'm not even done with it yet.
Do you want to share with us your takeaway about the ladder of influence?
Well, basically we had an influence exercise. We had to rank our classmates in relative influence and how much influence they've had on you and in the class. And it's pretty crazy because you have your expectation and then you see everyone else's ranking of you. It's a pretty pivotal moment, and there's a lot of follow-ups, a lot of good discussion and conversation that comes out of that exercise.
Very well said.
Yeah. Did you guys also do that exercise?
We did that, yes. I think it's been going for about 50 years. It's fascinating.
They tried to make a change, by the way. They tried to change it last quarter. Instead of a relative ranking, they did buckets. But a lot of students pushed back on that, and so now they're A/B testing it.
Okay, interesting.
So I want to ask about creator and influencer investing. What is it about the creator economy and influencers that excite you?
So we've had a thesis at Lightspeed for many years around the fact that it is far cheaper and more efficient to be able to turn a fan into a customer than it is to acquire a brand new customer. And so, as you can tell with the Facebook algorithms, it is so expensive to acquire a new customer now. But if you have Harry Stebbings reading you a bedtime story on Calm, which, by the way, nearly broke the internet. It went very viral when he posted about his bedtime story. Then it's incredible for Calm when that happens. Or if you're House Labs and you have Lady Gaga, who is, talking about how this product is just so clean, all the science behind it, then you can start to convert her 100 million followers to be loyal, repeat customers of a really terrific product. But it's interesting, when the Honest Company, which we invested in early, went public, they said this is product first and celebrity second. And so I have to say, it has to always be product first. You need an exceptional product. And then, yes, a celebrity, creative person, influencer behind it. But it has to, number one, be a terrific product.
The two ideas that come to mind is like rare beauty.
Yeah.
Like, what is rare beauty without Selena Gomez? Can it stand on its own? And then we also know like Kylie Cosmetics. Without Kylie, what is the product and can it stand on its own? And it's kind of difficult even with the naming of the products. Like Kylie Cosmetics, her name is in the product, whereas Rare Beauty doesn't have Selena's name right then and there. So potentially, like, if she weren't there, it could flourish still.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I mean, Kim Kardashian's done such an incredible job of Skims. And so even outside beauty, there's so many great examples of where celebrities have really driven such significant brands.
Speaking of these celebrity brands, many of them have women founders and also some women CEOs as well, like Lady Gaga, Sophia Amoruso, and Gwyneth Paltrow. Speaking about women founders and also women in the VC world, there's still a lot to be done for women founders to receive VC funding and to also get more women in VC firms. What do you think can be done, and is there something you'd like to tell to women who are in the space or aspiring to be in the space?
For us, it's about giving it the importance that it really deserves. And so at Lightspeed, a third of our consumer companies are now founded by a woman. And we are equally focused on bringing the strongest people in to Lightspeed to be VCs. And it just so happens that over a third of those are also women. And that is not true just in the US, but also in Europe, in Israel, in India. Like Lightspeed globally, about a third of our investors are women. And, I hope that very soon is half. And so I always think, like, my advice to anybody is, like, if you want to be doing something, start doing it today. So start acting like you're a VC today if you want to be a VC. And the same thing in this situation. It's like, hey, if you're a woman and you want to take risk and start a great startup, then, do it. Take that plunge. Because there's definitely a lot of VCs out there who see the greatness in what you're doing.
I love that. And I think that's all that we have time for, but I think that's a really good note to end on. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Cherie's Corner. Before we get into the main takeaways, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'd also really appreciate it if you could share this episode with someone who you think might find this content helpful. Alrighty, let's get to the takeaways. The first takeaway is to think about what your end goal is and then work backwards. Nicole says you need to think 2 to 3 steps ahead and map out what are the tools and skills you need now in order to get there. For example, if you want to build a travel-related startup because you love to travel but you don't have any startup experience, try joining companies that might help you learn along the way, like Airbnb or Yelp, so you can get experience in that area. Thinking 2 or 3 career steps ahead is a strategic approach that helps you to shape your professional future in a very proactive and intentional way. By clearly envisioning where you want to be in the future, you can identify the skills, experiences, and knowledge required in order to get there. The second takeaway is to embrace your natural rhythms, whether you're a night owl or an early bird. Personally, I'm a morning person, but justice for night owls. I love when Nicole reveals that she's a night owl and gets some of her most creative work done in the evenings. For night owls, that might mean scheduling your brainstorm session or your deep work tasks for the evening, when your energy levels and concentration peak. Conversely, if you're an early bird, you'll probably tackle those challenging problems and perform the best right in the morning. By listening to your body and tailoring your work to fit your natural tendencies, you're probably going to be more effective. The third takeaway is that we hear what it's like to serve on a board and what differentiates an active versus an inactive board member. In Nicole's definition, serving on a startup's board requires more than just showing up to the meetings. It's about deeply engaging, preparing, and committing to an organization's success. When a startup founder takes investor money and creates a board, it can be a decade-long relationship. So choosing the right board members is so important. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Cherie's Corner. I'll see you next time. Bye.